Natural gas prices have jumped after walkouts at two major liquefied natural gas facilities in Australia.
The strikes are taking place at two plants belonging to US energy giant Chevron. Australia is the world's biggest LNG exporter, and the plants account for more than 5% of global LNG capacity. European gas prices spiked by as much as 12%.
Samantha Dodd is head of natural gas research at Goldman Sachs. So, Samantha, firstly, help us understand why these workers are threatening to take action.
Yeah, in fact, strike action has started as of this morning, Australian time, right? And even though the details of the negotiations have been kept private, it appears that the main requests have to do with salaries as well as broader working conditions.
And could we see a last-minute deal?
Absolutely. This whole negotiation process has been ongoing throughout this period, right? So in Australia, you have several steps you need to take before you actually engage in strike action. You can require the authorization to vote for it, then you actually vote for strike, you give notice, and then you start actual strike action. But all the while, the parties continue to negotiate. So yes, we can absolutely still see a resolution here.
And do you think it will have a big impact on global gas supplies? And we know that Saudi Arabia and Russia, they have cut output of natural gas now.
Right, so you have two things that matter. One is it's the impact, right? We know these are large facilities, but for example, the initial strike action that has started today is not a 24-hour strike, it's a partial strike, right? So the first thing to do is just to check on the impact. So far, there hasn't been an impact in exports, but we need to monitor in the coming days. The second factor is duration. If you have a full impact of exports for 3 days, that's not a big deal, but a longer lasting disruption can absolutely impact the availability of LNG cargoes, not just to Asia, right? This is the interesting bit, because even though these facilities are in Australia, if Australia gets tight in terms of its own LNG balances, they increase competition for LNG cargoes elsewhere in the world. So LNG availability for Europe can be impacted.
And are there any contingency plans in place to address potential disruptions to gas supplies resulting from the strike?
So Chevron has alluded to the possibility of bringing contingent workers to replace the striking workers, but this is not very clear because LNG operations can be quite specialized. Right, so it's not that easy to just bring someone with no experience in operating an LNG facility to do the job.
And looking ahead, what is the outlook for European gas prices and market volatility in the near term, considering the ongoing strike and the potential for future disruptions?
No, exactly. Volatility is the name of the game here, right? Because we're in a bit of a binary situation. If the strikes are resolved and we don't face a big disruption, we could see easily a 30% decline in natural gas prices in Europe. And the reason for that is if you look at natural gas storage today across Europe, it's actually very well supplied. But if the strike does go ahead in a way that is more impactful to supplies, we could just as easily see these natural gas prices more than double from current levels. So quite binary.
Thank you very much. That is Samantha Dodd, head of natural gas research at Goldman Sachs.
Well, that's the outlook for Europe. But what effect is this LNG strike having in the United States? Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York. So, John, are natural gas prices up there as well?
Yes. Yes, they are, Robin. Thank you very much. We've been monitoring this very closely here, and I just used my friend Joel's Bloomberg terminal just over there a few seconds ago, and I note now that the price of liquefied natural gas in the European arena is now up by some 13%. So we're seeing surging prices all over the world. The problem, of course, is this major strike at the Chevron facilities in Australia, as you've just been hearing, responsible for 5% or more of all LNG supplies around the world. And here's a local company for you just to note. Cheniere Energy is based in Houston in Texas in the south of the country, and their shares are up by 2% at the moment, and that tells you all you need to know, because the share price goes up when the commodity gets a bit scarce for fairly obvious reasons. Liquefied natural gas is a very interesting thing. It's relatively new. It's been around since the late 1800s, early 1900s, but it was only in the late 50s, early 60s that they managed to start pressurizing the gas into liquid form and then putting it in ships and sending it all over the world. And the first ship from America left Louisiana in 1959 and went to the UK. These days, the big producers, of course, are the government of Qatar in the Middle East. They own the gas fields all the way over to Iran. Chevron in the United States, which we're talking about, Exxon, Shell in Europe, PetroChina as well. All of these are big players in LNG. And the big importers, I think China has usurped Japan now. It used to be Japan. Now I believe it's China, the ROK, the US and Europe, all very, very big customers. As we heard, Europe in particular is very susceptible to these kind of price hikes, although, as the previous guest said, it's worth noting that they're well stocked at the moment. So there's time. We'll have to see how it works out. Finally, here in America, we are at a crossroads between knowing that we probably have to go down the route of renewables and also at the same time realizing, I think, that we're not going to be able to do completely without fossil fuels like LNG and crude oil for a very long time. And here, the presidential election next year is likely to be dominated by talk of President Biden's anti-fossil fuel policy. The Republicans will say, well, why don't you drill? Why don't you frack and bring down our energy costs, because we have that available to us here in the United States. China and Russia and Saudi's decision to go on cutting crude oil earlier this week, of course, plays into that same argument as well. And energy stocks have been among the best performers here at the exchange for at least the last 3 or 4 years. Robin?
John, it sounds like you're on a very lively trading floor today. Let me ask you about US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, because she's been speaking, hasn't she?
Yes, it's someone's birthday, I think. Also, it's Friday, and it's very, very hot here. That's why I don't wear a tie. It's just unbelievably hot in New York at the moment. Yes, Janet Yellen's been speaking on the sidelines of the G20 in New Delhi. A number of things of note. She said that Russia and the special operation in Ukraine are causing food supplies around the world to dwindle and prices to go up, and that they know that all too well. She's pledged further aid for Ukraine, and she thinks it will clear the Congress. She's also talked about more development finance for emerging nations around the world. She's talking more about World Bank reform, which is something that we'll hear about at the UN General Assembly in a couple of weeks. She thinks that China's economic challenges at the moment won't have too much of an effect on the US. She thinks that Beijing has room to what she calls sort of policy space to boost the economy in China. The G20, of course, is an economic club, Robin, you know that, so I think over the next 2 days, less about politics, more about dollars and cents in terms of CENTS and SENSE. And, of course, President Biden is attending, President Xi is not, so it's all eyes now on the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting coming up in San Francisco in November to see whether these two key leaders get together face-to-face, and whether they can start to bring their countries a little bit more closer together. Robin?